Good afternoon, everybody. I'm calling the regular hearing of the Planning Commission to order for Thursday, October 4th, 2018. Ms. Vaughn, would you take roll, please?
Thank you, Chair Wiscombe.
Here.
Vice Chair Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner Campanella.
Here.
Commissioner Higgins.
Here.
Commissioner Jordan.
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Here.
Commissioner Thompson.
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Okay, we're going to go on to item number 2, which is preliminary matters. 2A, request for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items. Ms. DeBusk?
Thank you, Chair Wiscombe. We do have item 3A, which was the path update. They have requested a continuance to December 6th, 2018. So when we get to that item, if we could have a vote to continue, that would be appreciated.
Okay, thank you. And any announcements and appeals?
No announcements or appeals.
Okay, thank you. So we're now moving on to item 2C, which is review, consideration, and action on the following draft Planning Commission minutes and resolutions. So we have minutes from September 6, 2018, and resolution, and we had some adjustments to those minutes. So we have a redlined version of the changes to those minutes. This is the September 6, 2018. And then did we have, oh yes, and then additionally to the redlined items, we had one additional under the staff present on page 1 of those minutes. Ms. Ostringer and Ms. Neck were not present, so those two names will be stricken from that, and I think that's it. Does anyone want to make a motion? And do you want the resolution separated, or okay? Anyone?
Madam Chair, I'll move to approve with the revisions you've outlined.
Okay, and that includes the resolution?
Correct.
Okay, and you're seconding it, Commissioner Lodge? Okay. Any other comments? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, fine, that passes. Okay, and now we're going to move on to the September 13th, 2018 minutes and the resolution number 021-18 for that item. We again had some redline comments or redline changes to those, and then further on page 4 of 6, just a couple under Commissioner Campanella towards about 2/3 of the way down the page. Parking exceptions, it should be that it's just spelled incorrectly, and so that needs to be corrected. And also in that same sentence is a carryover from what should be exists, not exist. So I think those are all the changes we made to those, and I would entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, move to approve with those revisions.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other comments? All in favor? Aye. Okay, great. That carries unanimously. Good. Okay, so that takes care of that item. We are moving on to item 2D, which is comments from members of the public pertaining to items not on the agenda. Is anyone here that for general public comment for items not on the agenda? I'm just quickly going through the speaker slips. I think you're all here for item 3B. Okay, good. Okay, seeing no one, I'm going to close general public comment, and we're going to move on to new items. So item 3A, as Ms. DeBusk said, the applicant has requested a postponement of the report on PATH. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the postponement.
Madam Chair, I move that we postpone and reschedule this item to December 6, 2018, as requested by the applicant and agreed to by the city.
Second.
Okay. So you can take either Commissioner Lodge or Commissioner Campanella. They chimed in at the same time, or seconded the motion. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye? Okay, that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we're going to move on to item number 3B. It's the application of Mark Lloyd, applicant for Jason L. Rick, property owner, 104 Jorgensen Lane, RS 1A zone, general plan designation, low-density residential, one dwelling unit per acre. This is for a 2-lot subdivision and construction of a new single residential unit with attached garage on lot number 2. The discretionary applications required for this project are 1, a tentative subdivision map. 2, item number 2 would be 2 street frontage modifications, and number 3, 2 public street waivers. So I see that we have staff here and the applicant is here. So the way this will work, staff will give a presentation. If there's any questions from the commission, they can be asked at that time. And then we'll move on to the applicant's presentation. And I believe you said, Mr. Lloyd, about 20 minutes or 15, 20 minutes. Okay. So we'll give you 20 minutes for that. And then, again, any questions from the commission? And then we'll go on to public comment. And if you have any time left over after public comment, you're welcome to come back up to the podium and speak to the public comment. So, Ms. DeBusk, would you like to introduce staff for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tony Bauman will be giving the staff presentation for this project.
All right. Hello, Chair Wiscombe and Planning Commissioners. As Chair Wiscombe introduced the item, it's a project at 104 Jorgensen Lane, proposing a 2-lot subdivision. And the project description is to subdivide the existing 4.37 acre lot into 2 lots. Lot 1 would be 2.28 acres, lot 2, 2.09 acres, and lot 2 would include the entirety of the private street on the property. So when you net out that private road, it's 1.66 acres. The proposal also includes construction of a new house on the new lot. It would be a 2-story, approximately 5114 square feet, including an attached 3-car garage, the driveways, grading, retaining walls, landscaping. The required applications for the project are a tentative subdivision map to split off that new lot, 2 street frontage modifications, and 2 public street waivers. This is a vicinity map to show where the project is. It's in the El Cielito general plan neighborhood. It's Jorgensen Lane is a private lane off of West Mountain Drive. It's the entrance to Jorgensen's just across the street from the Sheffield Reservoir near Mission Ridge Road and Mountain Drive. This is the subject lot as it exists today, the 4.37 acre lot outlined in green. This project has some history, or the site has some history with the city. In 2007, there was a 4-lot subdivision approved by the Planning Commission. Let me go back to this slide for a second. So this is in this outline in green. If you look at the 2 lots just to the bottom of that, you can see how that was one rectangle. That was the previous project for a 4-lot subdivision. The Planning Commission approved it, and then a group of neighbors, a large group of neighbors and petitioners appealed the Planning Commission approval to the City Council, also in 2007. The City Council upheld the appeal, and they directed the applicant to return with a 3-lot subdivision instead of 4 lots. So that's the lot that I had outlined in green was the third of that. The 2 lower lots plus that one that were the subject lot today was the 3-lot subdivision. So the subject lot resulted from the 3-lot subdivision. And the current application before you today proposes to subdivide that lot as it was approved by the Planning Commission. It's basically the same proposal, same lot line as it was in 2007. So this shows the subject lot, a little bit closer vicinity map. And then this is the proposal today to split the lot right there to create the new yellow lot and build a new house on that. This is a view of the proposed tentative map. I mainly have this here for reference. I think the applicant will get into more of a project description, but I was wanting to include this slide for reference. So I drew on this real heavy red line to show the new lot line as it would be created. And you can see how it circles around the fire department turnaround at the end of Jorgensen Lane, so that whole street, the turnaround area, would all become part of Lot 2. This is a closer view of the new Lot 2 and the proposed building footprint, driveways, hardscaping. This also shows in kind of that darkest green color the building envelope on the Lot 2. There's an existing development envelope there now. If we go back to here, when this is, if this is an entire lot shown here before the lot split, there's a development envelope for the house on Lot 1 over to the left, and then the development envelope also exists on that lot for an accessory building or another structure. So that just remains, but it would become the development envelope for the new lot for the new primary dwelling. The rest of the green color outside that area is an area where development rights are restricted to be left in a natural state. And then there's a seasonal drainage. Maybe I can point to it here. Very faint blue lines that you probably can't see in the medium green color, where there's a kind of a dry creek bed. It might flow with water some in the winter seasonally. But the lighter green is on the house side of the top of bank. So this edge of the light green toward the west is the top of bank, and then the light green is a 50-foot setback. That was recommended through development application review by the City Creeks Division. They like to see these 50-foot top of bank creek setbacks, and in this case, this lot was big enough to accommodate the full requested 50 feet by the Creeks Division. So that means the edge of that 50-foot creek setback would become the edge of the development envelope. The applicant's giving up a little more, or reducing the developable area of the lot as it exists today a little bit with this application. This is really just for reference. The proposed landscaping for the lot, it's not particularly readable. Maybe one thing I'll mention on this landscape plan on the left side, inside the building footprint is where 3 oak trees are proposed to be removed, and they're proposed to be replaced at a 3-to-1 ratio. So that means replacement of 9 trees, and they would be over here. We've got 4 kind of grouped here together, another one down here by the street. And then over here in this creek area, there's a group of 4 proposed trees, and they're proposed to be 24-inch box coast live oaks. And then the landscape plan to the right is the riparian restoration planting as approved by the City Creeks Division for that top of bank area. The project went to conceptual design review at the SFDB on July 9th, and the SFDB found the proposal to be generally acceptable. I was at that hearing, and I asked them to make sure that before they continued the project to the Planning Commission, that they thought they had seen enough detail that they could be able to ultimately make the findings. So it was a very conceptual set of plans presented to them, but even so, given what they saw, they said, yes, we would be able to find the project, consistent with the neighborhood preservation ordinance findings and the hillside findings and the grading findings. So they continued it at the very first meeting to the Planning Commission. And the SFDB will approve the project with those findings when it returns to them. And I made a note here, there's a section in the Planning Commission conditions that we drafted for design review. So if the Planning Commission wanted to give any input on landscaping or particulars with the house, the design of the landscaping, design of the development on the lot, those comments or conditions of the Planning Commission could be communicated to the SFDB in that section of the conditions. And staff created the conditions that we attached to your staff report. We kind of spun it off of the old 2007 conditions that were much more detailed and elaborate. That previous project included, the 4 lots plus putting in the public street, constructing the private street and all the grading that went along with it. So it was a lot more extensive project. So back then, staff asked for a lot more studies. There were biological studies, arborist reports. I think there was even a geologic study, soils reports, all that kind of thing at that time. So we reviewed those studies and the past conditions to see which conditions of approval are applicable today, given today's scope of work, to construct a new house on the lot. So the project is requesting approval of a tentative subdivision map. And these comments, mainly my comments, are really relating staff's analysis with regard to the proposal and the required findings. So these are kind of bullet points of the findings. The project complies with the requirements in the Santa Barbara Municipal Code Subdivision Ordinance and the Subdivision Map Act. And basically that comes down to being consistent with the general plan. So we looked at residential density. So the project is in that El Cielito area. The A1 zoning general plan density is 1 dwelling unit per acre. In addition to that, there's a slope density requirement so that steeper sloped lots need to be larger to comply with slope density, and this project is consistent with that. The proposed lot, see if I get these right. The proposed lot 1 is 2 acres to meet that slope density requirement, and the proposed lot 2 is more than 1.5 acres to meet the slope density requirement. The project, with regard to general plan policies on trees, the project protects and leaves as many existing trees remaining as possible or as feasible to put a house in there, and mitigates the tree removals that are proposed with planting replacement trees. It has that riparian landscape plan to take care of the riparian resources in that Seasonal Creek area. The noise policies in the general plan, it's not that the proposed project would cause noise, but it's not located in an area that is noisy, so the residents of the property wouldn't be bothered by existing ambient noise. And it's consistent with housing policies by providing a new dwelling unit, new housing. Another area of findings is that the site is physically suitable, which it is. It is in the hillside district, and it does have some slope, but it's not unreasonably sloped to be developed as it's proposed. And it wouldn't cause any environmental damage. The project's also requesting 2 street frontage modifications for the 2 new lots. The zoning ordinance requires a minimum of 100 feet of frontage for a lot on a public street. This one it doesn't have any frontage on a public street because it's a private street, but it does provide more than 100 feet of frontage for each lot on the private street. And this type of development without full street frontage is compatible with the existing neighborhood. I'll get to that in a little bit with an aerial view of the site. The 2 last bullet points are just general findings for modifications, that the project is an appropriate improvement, so the subdivision in this new house is an appropriate improvement, and the proposal is consistent with the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. So the last requested approval are 2 public street waivers for the 2 lots. They're kind of closely related to the street frontage modifications. In this case, it's a waiver by the Planning Commission that a new lot not front on a public street. The Planning Commission has the ability to waive that requirement. The existing site has no public street frontage, but it is fronting on a private street that adequately serves the site. This private street was generally constructed to city street standards for width. It doesn't have city sidewalks, but the sidewalks aren't really appropriate in this area anyway. But generally, the way it's constructed is fully up to public street standards. This private street also has a very solid, robust maintenance agreement, an owner's association to take care of it. And the public street waivers are supported by City Public Works staff and the fire department. And Public Works commented that, it is built to public street standards, yet the responsibility to maintain it doesn't lie with Public Works. It's with this private owners group. And it has that fire department turnaround at the end, and it's up to, it can carry the weight of a fire truck. So fire department supports that. This slide, I wanted to mention this. In our staff report on page 7, we have that section on environmental review, but I wanted to make a correction. In our notice for this hearing, we indicated that the project is exempt from further environmental review per CEQA exemption 15303 for new construction and CEQA section 15183 for projects consistent with a community plan or zoning. We didn't really need, it's kind of unnecessary to cite 2 CEQA exemptions on that notice, but that's the way we did it. But we would like to focus on the 15183. Either one of the 2 that were in the notice are appropriate, and the project could be found and exempt under either of those. But the 15183 is a better fit. So the staff report just talks about the 15303. So on this slide, I would kind of like to just consider this slide to be a replacement for that section on page 7. So we're going to go with the 15183 because the project is consistent with the general plan, like I described before regarding density, etc., and consistent with the zoning ordinance and the slope density and all that. The 15183 exemption requires a finding by the Planning Commission. We'll have that listed on a slide for and ask you to make that finding. So I think I just covered it. The proposed residential density is consistent. The other part of the finding for 15183 is that the project poses no project-specific significant environmental effects that are peculiar to the project or the site. Just adding this new lot and this new dwelling unit is consistent with the general plan, what the general plan envisions for the density for this area. So I wanted to say a few words about this. This is that vicinity map with the site. This is Jorgensen Lane coming off of Mountain Drive, and this is the project site. And really, this illustrates a lot of staff's thinking and analysis of this application. Because looking at this view, you see the subject lot is pretty big. But if you look at all the other lots in this vicinity, there are many examples of lots with no public street frontage. A lot of other landlocked lots that don't front on a public street. And then some that do are flag lots. There's some flag lots scattered around that wouldn't have the required 100 feet of frontage. They would need a street frontage modification. So we think the public street waiver and the street frontage modifications are just very compatible, very consistent with the way this neighborhood is developed. And not to, I mean, we think this discussion of this, the way just looking at the parcel boundaries, it's not really simplistic because there aren't really any other underlying factors. This picture kind of tells the story of the application. So with that, staff, our recommendation is that the Planning Commission approve the tentative subdivision map, the 2 street frontage modifications, and grant 2 public street waivers, making the findings in the staff report with the change to make the California Environmental Quality Act section 15183 finding that the project is exempt from further environmental review. And also the approval would be subject to the conditions of approval in the staff report. And I don't know whether to bring this up now. We were expecting a neighbor that I've spoken to adjacent to the property to bring up an issue regarding sewer access, but maybe we can save that and come back to that. So I think that concludes my presentation. And Joe Poire from the city, the chief from City Fire Department, is here if you have any questions for him, because I know you've seen the public comment that we've received. A lot of it has to do with fire safety and fire evacuation. So Joe is here in case he's needed to address those issues.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, and I imagine that we want to probably get our questions for the fire department out of the way first. Mr. Poirier, thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it. I think some of us will have questions for you.
Chair Wiscombe, Joe Poirier, City Fire Marshal, Battalion Chief, and Mr. Baumann invited me to come today just because of the issues that were raised concerning fire safety. So let me start, before the questions start, with the code requirements for this development. This, from a fire department perspective, is a fairly simple project. It's one that is approvable, that City Fire Department staff did approve based on our code requirements for this type of project. They include access, which we have here, access to water, hydrants, which are also part of the infrastructure, high fire construction requirements. The landscaping plan that was referred to earlier will have to be approved by our wildland landscape person, and defensible space requirements ongoing. So all of those elements are taken into consideration, and that's why the fire department has found this to be an approvable project. Now, beyond that, there have always been raised general philosophical questions about fire safety and evacuation and so forth. And they are a worthy subject, but not something that the fire department has any code-driven requirements that we can enforce. And maybe part of a larger study for the city. I know I've spoken here in the past on this subject, and I've spoken to city council about it, but that would require a large city effort to come up with a holistic, plan for the 4,000 parcels up in the Riviera. So that's just for openers. I just wanted to kind of explain our position on this particular project, and I'll take any questions that you have for me.
Thank you very much for that. Commissioner Higgins, does your question relate to fire?
Yes.
Good. Okay, you go ahead then. I just don't want to have you stay here if you have other things to do, which I'm sure you do.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
It's related to fire, but it's for Mr. Baumann. Our safety element, the city safety element, primarily deals with public projects or public lands or public infrastructure. But there are some policies there that relate to new development, and I didn't see in the staff report sort of a summary of the project's review or vetting through the safety element. Did you not do that because it was most of what's in the safety element is public project development or related to coastal hazards?
Madam Chair, Mr. Higgins, the reason is because we don't review projects on for code requirements based on the
I
general...
would never ask you a general plan question. That's for the planner. But you can answer it if you like.
Oh, okay.
It's, the safety element is one of those things that nobody ever looks at.
Well, those safety element policies, we just looked at it as they trickle down to ordinance requirements, the
Okay.
high fire building code and the high fire clearance for landscaping. And, the fire hydrants are in place, the road is the right dimensions for fire access, that kind of thing.
Okay, thanks.
There any other fire-related questions that anyone has? I actually had one. There's a fire protection plan, is that what it's called, in place for this development, this subdivision? Did I read that correctly?
The
Yeah, fire
wildland fire
protection
plan is, the wildland fire plan is the city's community fire
Oh,
protection
okay,
plan.
so it's the general, that's what it refers to, because my assumption was that there was a fire protection plan in place for this particular subdivision, and Mr. Lloyd is confirming, yes, indeed, that's the fact. So are you familiar with that plan?
I am not.
You're not? Okay, okay. Because I was wondering, and when was the last review of the wildland fire plan?
It was, the evacuation element was updated a couple of years ago, but the wildland fire plan in general is due for a complete review and update.
Okay, because that's, because I guess my question was that this fire protection plan, maybe Mr. Lloyd can address this, the applicant can address this, that the fire department was required to review this fire protection plan as a condition of the subdivision, but maybe I'm wrong about that. So we'll get to that later, that since you don't know about that, it related to this subdivision and not...
Chair Wiscombe, that's entirely possible that one of my staff reviewed a protection plan of some kind in the course of the development, even as far back as 2007.
Okay.
When it first came up.
So-
I'm just not personally aware of it.
Right, okay. So if your staff did review a specific plan for this development, then my question would be, based on today's fire season, fire intensity, et cetera, would something that was created in 2007, do you think it might still be valid? Would it merit another look? That's what I'm asking you, based on today's fire conditions.
Chair Wiscombe, I think that all of the fire elements that we have in place constantly deserve another look. But I think the number one priority is the wildland fire plan as a whole. And I realize as I'm saying this that just saying it is an expensive proposition.
Right.
It requires an EIR and several other things go into that. But it is one of those things where, if we want to keep it current and we want to consider things like even moratoriums or closures or things like that we can incorporate into that and then codify, that maybe that would be the time to do it when we update the wildland fire plan.
Okay.
But I think I have emphasized that here and at City Council in the past, that it's we consider it very important that we update that plan as soon as we can.
Right, okay. Thank you for answering that. So does anyone else have any questions of
Yes.
Marshall Poirier? Yes, Commissioner Thompson. I'm sorry, I didn't see your light on. Sorry.
I'd like to have Mr. Poirier comment about the road, which is a private road, but it's my understanding from the staff that it meets the fire department's requirements for full access to all the sites, not just this newly created lot, but all 4 lots.
Madam Chairman, Commissioner Thompson, the road does meet fire department standards, not just for width, but also for bearing capacity and turnaround at the end.
Would it be a fair assumption on our part that having an updated road going back into that section as opposed to leaving it as undeveloped wild land actually enhances the fire safety for the area?
The short answer probably would be yes, but to have what we do is we look at roads that are proposed to see if they meet fire department standards, but we don't ourselves propose to build roads into areas unless it's absolutely necessary. So, because otherwise the fire department would be proposing roads across the front country. But yeah, the getting back into different areas. I mean, if we need to do it with what we call a Type 1 engine, which is our regular fire engine, that's the kind of road that we need.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one question for Mr. Poirier. With the fire department approving the project we have before us today, I would just like to understand if there's any sort of periodic review of these private access ways, private roads, that at their time of project approval we were able to check off all the boxes, so to speak, but over time, because they're requiring private maintenance, not city maintenance, how do we know that they continue to be maintained to the standards that we require and that you've approved?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, that's an excellent question. There are two elements to that. One of them is and this is the one that comes up the most, is overgrowth on the road. Periodically, we go through public streets and we, as you know, do road clearance, and we clear about a third of the streets every year. But the private roads, the Wildland Assessment District is not charged with doing private roads. It is, however, the law, and it's not just a law for the city of Santa Barbara, it's a state law. People are required to clear up to 10 feet on either side. So what we depend on much of the time, and this happens a lot, is people alerting us or engine companies alerting us. Often they'll go out on a medical emergency and they will come back to us and say, look, this is so overgrown, it's striking the engine as we go, we're damaging the apparatus as we get to the medical emergency, so would you do something about it? And that's when we go out and enforce the clearance. Likewise with infrastructure elements, if they drive on a road that's now substandard or is partially caved in, we work with Public Works to find out if it's private or public, and B, if we can get the local homeowners association or individual responsible to fix it.
As a follow-on, do we have any sort of periodic reconfirmation requirements from the owners of the private roads to maintain, to state, local laws and requirements? Anything like that? I didn't see anything in our conditions of approval, but I didn't know if I was overlooking a requirement as part of approving a project.
Commissioner Schwartz, we don't have a reporting requirement as such, no.
Okay. Lastly, is there, perhaps again if I'm overlooking, is there any sort of special agreement that's required outside of types of documents we have before us today, conditions of approval, for the city, in a sense, entering into an agreement with one or more private property owners that we're approving the project with certain conditions that require maintenance to be maintained, and yet we don't have a follow-on process to periodically reconfirm that the maintenance is occurring? I don't know, and I don't know if Ms. Ostringer wants to comment. Do we need anything? Do we not have liability, even as a follow-on measure, sort of in perpetuity? Any comment at all on that?
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Schwartz, as Fire Marshal Poirier was saying, the code section requires that private roads and public roads be maintained to a specific standard, and the city does and has enforced on those codes, and that's the mechanism that we use to make sure that private roads are being maintained to the appropriate fire standards.
Okay. And I'll close by just mentioning the reason I'm asking this is not only that we have a clear legally documented and legally enforcing agreement between the city and the private property owners, but also, as unfortunately we've experienced very recently in Montecito, where there are physical constraints and where a governmental entity, government agency needs access to private property over private roads if there is loss of property, loss of life, or threatened loss of life. I just would hope, I'll say to Ms. Ostringer, I hope that we're protecting ourselves in terms of clear documentation and legal understanding, and also, I'll just say, for lack of a better term, that we're not liable for that, because if we're not requiring that we follow through on some type of a periodic maintenance, and the private property is also not required to recertify, in a sense, or reconfirm periodically that they are maintaining according to the conditions of approval, we could have this gap. And yet our fire trucks will go in to serve the property and the persons in case of fire. So I'll just leave it at that, and I know we face this regularly, but this is really on my mind not in spite of, but as a follow-on to the Thomas fire and debris flows. Yeah.
Chair
Commissioner
Wiscombe,
Schwartz.
if I could briefly speak to that point. The city has governmental immunities, and that's what we rely on in these cases, and that's what we would be relying on here.
Okay.
And just one more note on that. Our engine companies do get out in their districts constantly, and they look for things like this. And when they come across something, they get back to us and say, we can't get up this driveway because of X, Y, or Z, we go out and do the enforcement.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. Commissioner Campanella?
I just thought of a question for you, sir. Where the house is going to be sited, there are the rear of a number of lots, properties that back up to it, off Mountain, I guess, and also Las Canoas. Where the house is sited, does that present any obstacle for fire to get to the rear of these lots if they had to access it off this private road?
If anything, the house in question being built with the driveway access and clearance around their own home, defensible space, enhances that more than anything. So it's it's one of those things where generally with high fire construction and the landscaping involved and everything else, it might actually make it a little bit easier for us to maneuver around in the area by hand line or by fire engine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Campanella. And Commissioner Thompson?
Right, thank you. This discussion about the maintenance of the private road led me to think about the fire hydrants that are there. Now, I don't know if those are dedicated to the public or if they're privately maintained, but does the fire department get involved with checking those fire hydrants back in there the same way they do alongside of public roads?
Commissioner Thompson, generally, if they're connected to the city water system, Public Works has a schedule and they contract out for that type of thing. They flow test them and make sure they're still operating.
I would assume they have to be connected to the public water system.
Correct.
So then Public Works would have a periodic check on the fire hydrants.
And I believe they subcontract out for that now.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other lights on. I just had one more question, and it might be for Mr. Baumann. I don't know. This is in the high fire hazard area, but not the extreme area, correct? So an ADU could be built on property in this area, correct? For
That's correct.
New
this
living
is
dwelling.
one of the foothill
Okay.
high fire areas.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's great. Fire Marshal Poirier, thank you so much for coming. Really
Thank you very much.
appreciate it, and you're welcome to stay if you'd like. I'm sure you have other things to do. We really appreciate your time here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes staff's presentation and our questions. So now we're going to move on to the applicant's presentation, and I have also a slip from Mr. Rick, the property owner. So I assume you two are going to both do the presentation, right? Is that
Madam Chair, Mark Lloyd from L&P Consultants. I'll be doing the presentation. Mr. Rick has some comments to make as the property
okay?
owner.
But I'm going to include his comments on, since he's also part of the applicant process, I'm going to include his comments on your presentation.
Well, I have no problem with that.
So on your 20-minute time, okay? And there is a little
I see.
digital ticker there so you can see how you're doing. And after the applicant's presentation, any commissioner questions to the applicant, and then we'll go to public comment, and you'll all have 2 minutes to speak. I have your speaker slips here. And after we close public comment, it will be back to the commission for deliberations. So, okay, Mr. Lloyd, thank you.
Madam Chair, Honorable Commissioners, my name is Mark Lloyd of L&P Consultants. I'm here to represent the applicant today. I appreciate the excellent presentation by staff. Tony, well done. And also Joe's time in being here and helping out. and explaining some of the matters related to the fire protection, which is obviously one of the biggest issues before and now. I think to be constructive, I'll dive into some of your questions to help clear those up. There is a fire protection plan in place. It was approved in the 2007 subdivision. It covers all of the property and any subsequent subdivisions of the property. At that time, it incorporated what were generally all of the cities and California high fire area fire requirements with brush clearing, type of construction, and all of those relative things. I think what's really important about that agreement, it is part and parcel of the project CC&Rs, of which there is maintenance agreements between the owners, and they're all part of those CC&Rs, and there's an enforcement provision through those CC&Rs. So if any one lot would be lack in implementing those fire protection measures, the other lot owners or one of the other lot owners could in fact prevail upon them in an enforcement action on those CC&Rs. And that type of thing also transcends to all the other documentation and agreements, including maintenance on the property. Commissioner Schwartz had a question about review of the private maintenance requirements. As I said, the CC&Rs fully lays out what is the maintenance requirements. It has a schedule for that requirement. I believe every 5 years it's supposed to be reviewed, the roads by a professional engineer, cost estimates for any repairs and maintenances that need to be done, and there's enforcement provisions in those CC&Rs. So this really goes far beyond what you have in a lot of the private road and driveway maintenance actions that you have all over this area. There's a whole nother level of enforcement that is somewhat modern since the 80s and whatnot. So these properties are subject to that. And I think that you see that that's ongoing. You saw that the grass was mowed out there and whatnot, and trees have been limbed up. There was also questions about maintenance of the fire hydrants and checking them for flow or whatever reasons you have. When the 2007 subdivision was done, the road is a private road, but overlaying that was a dedication to the city for access for public safety purposes, which allows the police, fire, ambulance, or anybody else to come into the road and check the fire hydrants or check the condition of any of the improvements that are there. And as Fire Marshal Poirier shared with you, the water system, including the fire hydrants, is part of the Santa Barbara public water system with public meters serving the houses for potable water and fire sprinklers. So those are actually public hydrants, are part of that public system that we dedicated in the 2007 subdivision. So I think that answered most of your questions as I have written them here. So again, I'm going to go into a brief presentation. I think that Tony's presentation answered a lot of the questions there. And so here's the site vicinity plan. Is there a pointer that's available? Okay.
We,
I've got a hand.
yeah, oh, you've got a hand, good, because these don't show up on the video,
Okay.
so,
All right,
yeah.
so here's an aerial photo of the property that might be a little bit interesting. Oops. It's a Google Earth 2018, I think it was June, so it's relatively recent. And here's Mr. Rick's house that's developed here. This is the house that is the original 107. This is the building site for what is parcel 1, and then here is the parcel 2 building site. You can see the remnants of the rock and stone that's piled in there. Here's the private road coming out. See how adept I am. And then coming out to Mountain Drive. And right here is the confluence of the so-called Y driveway with the 557, 559, and 563 neighbors, which runs back here. This is 563, this is 559, and that is 557. So just to give you some idea there in a photographic manner. The tentative map, Tony had showed you before, but this is the existing house here. So the development envelope, as he disclosed, exists currently over the property. Actually, the development envelope that exists right now goes up to the sewer easement. There's the sewer line coming right there where you see 3 or 4 lines. And we are reducing that back per the creek's suggestion that we do a restoration plan in there. So this project has a new element from the older project, in addition to what was done in the older project, for a restoration in there in that whole 50-foot area from top of bank to this 50-foot offset line there.
Mr. Lloyd, I'm going to interrupt you just for 1 minute. You need to speak into the microphone, so keep that in mind. If you need to move over to your computer, do, but your voice isn't broadcasting well.
Okay, and I will speak louder.
Thank you.
Also, the 2007 subdivision did not prohibit future split of the property. The movement from 4 lots down to 3 basically just merged what was the lot 4 into this lot. It left the development envelope on the map and is recorded and established. The road designs, the CC&Rs, all of the studies that were done that led up to the 2007 subdivision approval were all part of the adopted documents that were in the 2007 approval, less 1 lot. But all the mitigation measures in there, all the fire protection plan measures, all of the measures that are in all the documents include the whole property, and has wording in it that if it's further subdivided, then that property comes into as a 4th lot. And just to reiterate what Tony was saying, this project complies with all of the general plan policies, and it's specifically the housing element policy, which is encouraging the development of infill properties. And I think from the mapping that you saw that Tony showed, this is definitely an infill project. Wanted to go to the floor plans briefly. This in the staff report is noted as a 2-story structure. It's actually a 1-story structure, except over this tuck-under 3-car garage, which is the 2-story element of the garage, and then this bedroom wing here. And then going to the elevations, you can see that more clearly. Here's the front elevation with the tuck-under garages and the bedroom wing over that. But on all the other, and this is the one east elevation that shows that side elevation with that tuck-under garage element right in here. You can see the other elements come up as 1-story elements. The design of this was done to fit the terrain that's there, to minimize grading. Oops, we'll come back. You can see the existing grade line, which is this dashed black line right through there coming down. So there's a little bit of cut right in here to get that. But generally, the design of the building was to minimize grading and to tuck this into the landforms that exist. And the size of the house is below the FAR guidelines for floor area. We did go to Single Family Design Board. They supported the project in their minutes for size, bulk, and scale. They did ask that we do a reduction on the plate height. You can see this transom windows here that are above the front door foyer. That is done to get light into the living room area, and we're going to reduce that down and perhaps even eliminate that to bring down the plate height, which is a suggestion by Single Family Design Board. Tony spoke to you about the 3 oaks that are going to be removed, and the replacement is with 24-inch boxes. He showed you this landscape plan and pointed out where all the trees are, so I'm not going to bore you with that again. The full restoration plan here, this is the proposed restoration, all native drought-tolerant plantings. Wanted to go to the road photos here so we can see this. So this is the entry off of Mountain Drive, and it has been constructed to full fire department requirements there. These are other photos here that show you as we proceed up the driveway. This is sorry about that. This is a road that, a dirt road that is in the development dedication areas that I'm understanding that Public Works has used from time to time to access sewer manholes in the back of the property and on other properties to jet them and whatnot. And there's a notion that we would dedicate a access easement to Public Works so they could provide or perform those exercises, which I would like to voluntarily set forth that we would voluntarily accept that as a condition. So that goes back to the back property line, and this photo is the road continuing up. Here's the cul-de-sac with the full fire department width, turnaround area, and you can see we keep this pretty clear and clean here for truck access. This is the frontage in front of the lot. That split rail fencing is where the seasonal drainage goes under, so you're looking up towards the building site, and this is looking back down at it and showing the vegetation and the maintenance here. Probably this pepper is needing trimming, but they grow pretty fast. Wanted to come over here to the development envelope. This is looking north. There is 2 driveways proposed with the house. One driveway on the east side goes to the 3-car garage. There's another driveway on the west side, and this is looking at that. And as you drive up this driveway through here, there's a parking area that sits over here of which 2 additional cars can park. So we're providing 2 additional off-site parking spaces or on-site parking spaces off-street, so there'll be a total of 5 for the project. This is looking north from Jorgensen Lane across the building site. You can see that it's, relatively densely wooded in areas with the oak trees, and I suppose if you can't see buildings, then buildings can't see you in some fashion or manner. This is looking northeast across the site over to Mountain Drive, and this is looking directly east. This is the house that's up, I believe, at 599 Mountain Drive. Mr. Warnock, and I believe he put in a letter and email, and that's his house looking from the east side of the building site. Obviously, we're down on grade, and there's a garage to be built, and so the floor will be up about 10 feet from that grade, so a little bit more exposure, but you can see there's just oodles of natural screening in this project setting. I wanted to come to the driveway entry at the so-called Y drive. This is the driveway that goes down to 557, 559, and 563. And 2 of those properties wrote letters to you voicing concerns about access and emergency access and fire access, which are all pertinent and relevant issues. I live in Santa Barbara. I had a garage burned down in the T fire. I evacuated during the Thompson fire. I live near the mudslides, so I'm very sensitive to that. But when I got out of the letters, there was some concern as you come from this driveway onto the 20-foot roadway about stacking or something like that. Well, the 20-foot improvement that the previous subdivision did provides the required access. And I think that, this driveway here is 11 foot wide. It serves 3 single-family houses. And the current conditions for that, not that they're subject to them, would be a 16-foot driveway. I look back into the street files on this, and this is a 1987 addition or a conversion of a garage to a kitchen or something. And you can see that this is the corner property. This is the so-called Y. And there's a 20-foot access easement here that these 3 lots or 2 of the lots have over this lot to get out. And apparently there's a carport in the way, and I guess that's an obstruction to getting back and widening this out. But it appears that there could be some room to widen this driveway to 16 feet and maybe alleviate some of these concerns. The point I want to make is that we do not control that property or the easement, so we don't have any way to mitigate that impact which isn't resulting from our project. Last slide I had was along the lines of what Tony was showing you, and that is the lot sizes relative to all the surrounding properties. We exceed the size requirements under the zoning ordinance and the slope density provisions therein. We're larger in size than all of the surrounding lots, and we're compatible with the neighborhood parcels also. So in summary, I think the staff presentation has detailed the project compliance and consistency with the general plan, the zoning ordinance, and the subdivision map act. We can dedicate a public street. As the staff report says, it hasn't been Public Works operation to take that maintenance responsibility on. I understand that. That leaves that to the property owners. But again, within that maintenance, we actually have a heightened degree of maintenance of that road over virtually any other roads that are private roads or driveways that are in this neighborhood. We meet or exceed the fire access requirements. I believe that the traffic service level in this area for just general traffic patterns is the highest level that you can have. We have an approved, as I talked about earlier, fire protection plan, which is an enforceable provision within the CC&Rs, and as part of that, no long-term noise impacts and no impacts to public views, and we believe we have little impacts to private views. And I would encourage the PC to adopt the staff recommendation and findings for approval of this project. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Okay, I stopped the clock, and I have 3 minutes and 18 seconds on it, and I'm going to change it to 4 minutes and 18 seconds because I stopped you in the middle of your presentation to fix the mic. So I think Mr. Rick wants to come up and say a few words at this point, and
Thank you, Madam Chair.
then we'll go to questions. Thank you so much. Welcome, Mr. Rick.
Hello, Madam Chair and the rest of the commission. I mainly just wanted to come here today to introduce myself. My name is Jason Rick, and I'm the owner of this property. And I'm not a big developer. I'm not a developer of any kind. I'm not like an out-of-town investor. This is where I live. I live here with my wife and 2 children. They were raised here on this site, and I love Santa Barbara, and I love this neighborhood. And when my wife and I started thinking about possibly developing this part of our land, I mean, contrary to what many people might think, we're very concerned about what our neighbors think about what this potentially would impact them. And I think most of you were able to visit the site earlier this week, and I'm sure you noticed right away how private the setting is. And that was one of the first things we noticed when we thought about it, that we're not going to really impact our neighbors in any way. In fact, I think only 2 homes can partially see the building site, and so we felt really comfortable about that. And second point is we are on a private road. So the only people that will ever drive by this house or even see or even know that it exists are my good neighbors just below us that live on the road, Rich and Joy Goodstein, who support this project. So their family and our family are the only people that will ever even see this house or drive by it unless you drive down our private road, which is fine. You're welcome to, but... And in the subject of access, the concerns that we because we read all the letters from our neighbors, we want to find out their concerns and if we can answer any questions. And one of them was about the blocking of the road, and I was a little confused by that. We've been using that road for about 10 years. Our section of the road, I can't speak for the section that splits off, but our section, I've never had it blocked, our access, the entire time we've been using that road. So, and lastly, and also in terms of access, fire is foremost in our minds in this development. And like the fire marshal said, we actually believe that this helps reduce the fire risk in our neighborhood, not increasing it. And with the adoption, I'm sure all of you know, the ADU ordinance 5834 that was approved earlier this year, the city reviewed all the evacuation routes and actually approved our neighborhood for increased numbers of housing. So this is just one housing amongst possible hundreds in our neighborhood that could potentially be approved. So I could have easily skipped this meeting here today. Mark knows all this stuff much more than I do, but I wanted to come here and listen to my neighbors and their concerns in person and see if there's anything maybe my wife and I didn't think about when we were thinking about potentially doing this project. So I'm here to listen, and thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Rick. Okay, so I'm just going to write this down. You have 1 minute and 18 seconds left if you want to say anything after we go into public comment. But first of all, do any of my fellow commissioners have questions for the applicant? Mr. Jordan, your light was on first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have questions for staff. Is that okay?
Sure.
You said earlier staff or applicant. So, Mr. Bowman, both my questions for you have to do with the oak trees and the seasonal creek. So there's a 3-to-1 mitigation on the oak trees, but is the landscape plan that conditions that just a plan sheet, or will there be a condition that conditions that, and will it also include a out-year monitoring program for the survival of those trees?
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Jordan, we don't have any monitoring conditions in our proposed conditions. And I think we're just, I'd have to review the conditions. I don't think there's any 3-to-1 ratio. We got that from the old subdivision.
Is that what you just mentioned earlier? They're going
Right.
to knock down 3, you're going to put back 9, but right now it's just going to be a picture on a plan sheet?
I don't think we specified 3-to-1.
The only condition I could find in there had to do with during construction conditions, not a condition that required them to put back 9 trees. It references in a couple places a landscape plan, but I guess my question is there a plan that's a narrative, or is there a plan that's just a plan sheet that says 9 trees are going to go here? And then if so, certainly in the past, I've seen, for projects like this, I've seen out-year monitoring conditions or plans that lead to making sure those trees survive for 5 years. So while you're dwelling on that, I have the same kind of question for the restoration plan. There's a restoration plan which I don't see a plan. So I'm wondering if there's a plan somewhere else, or if that is also just a landscape sheet that shows where plants are going to be planted. And again, same question, if there is a restoration plan, why is there not a out-year, 5 years, what I've seen in the past, a 5-year monitoring plan to gauge the survival of that restoration plan?
The landscape plan itself has yet to be vetted out by the Single Family Design Board. I was anticipating looking to see that they approve a plan with that 3-to-1 oak tree mitigation. We do have a riparian landscape plan that's been approved by City Creeks Division, so I didn't expect that to change through SFDB. They already saw it and they're okay with that.
Does that plan have a monitoring program for out years?
Neither of them do.
So help me, Deborah, you might help me too. I want to, one of these I've seen before is that project, Bruce Bartlett was sitting up here with us, that had a sort of historical build, yes, San Remo project, which
San
I think
Remo
was
Drive.
which was a lot split. It had a creek involved. It had a restoration plan. And we sat here and worked through a restoration plan that also involved monitoring for 5 years or some period of time to make sure that the restoration plan was actually done well, and was successful. So why is this plan not similar to that?
It's really because we kind of spun this project off looking back at the old file for the 2007 subdivision. That planning file is probably 1,400 pages of stuff that we reviewed, including all the arborist reports and biological reports. And that project was a categorical exemption. It didn't have any mitigation monitoring or anything, and it wasn't identified as any kind of sensitive habitat.
When you're saying that project, you mean the San
The
Remo one?
the 2007 subdivision of this
All right.
land. So we didn't think, given that it's not a sensitive area or anything, it didn't really call for that kind of monitoring.
So your stance would be that this creek restoration plan is not similar to the one I'm referencing on San Remo.
We haven't treated it that way.
like
We've treated it more like
restoration
just
plan
a
light.
single-family residence landscape plan.
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Jordan, part of the difference also is that this isn't identified as a creek, it's more of a seasonal drainage. And
Okay.
so the landscape requirements in the restoration plan came later, and so we didn't do the typical, more robust creek restoration plan that we might have.
Okay.
But there is a condition that requires the applicant to comply with the approved landscape plan. So once this is ultimately approved by Single Family Design Board, then there is that recorded requirement. But we could also add a monitoring requirement, for example, a 5-year checkup, and require Creeks Division to go out and confirm that things have survived and that it's still as approved.
And could that simply also be done with the oak tree mitigation too? On a simple basis?
Commissioner Jordan, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
And then, Ms. Ostringer, I have a question or two from you regarding the comments we've seen that I'm sure you've seen on what staff is calling the 2007 City Council decision to, rather than approve 4 lot, to just approve 3. And staff is characterizing that, in their words, as a compromise at that time. So my question is, is the same government code and subdivision map act language that's in place today that allows for a prior subdivision to be subdivided again, was that also the case in 2007?
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Jordan, yes, it was. I wasn't here in 2007, so I'm not sure how they got around that, if it was a voluntary compromise by the project owner at the time, but the subdivision act is quite clear that properties that have been subdivided can be further subdivided so long as they meet the code requirements and general plan. The commission can impose appropriate, the language is appropriate conditions or requirements on the consecutive
And
subdivision.
there's nothing in the record that shows that there was a condition in 2007 or a covenant that restricted that ability to come back and do it again in the future.
And I would say that if it was, it would probably be preempted by state law and void against public policy, because the subdivision map act makes it clear that the city can't have a policy or an ordinance that would prohibit successive subdivision.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Jordan. Commissioner Campanella?
Thank you. I think that's looking at the tape on the consent item at City Council back then. I think Mr. Wiley, City Attorney, said it the same way. So, yeah.
Glad we're consistent.
Yeah. No. A question on the building envelope. Is the building envelope remaining the same prior to the lot split, but only part of that envelope is being irrevocably offered to dedicate to the city?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Campanella, so when the 2007 subdivision was done, we offered as an irrevocable dedication of development rights around the non-building envelope area. I have been, since that time, and the city never accepted that dedication, but by law that stands out there for 21 years and whatnot, and can be accepted. It was rejected, but it remains open. It's my understanding from staff that the city is no longer doing that, so that dedication remains in there. Nonetheless, the way that this map is composed is it sets out a number of use areas. And so outside of the development envelope, in the land use legend on the map, there's a pretty detailed description of what can be done outside of the development envelope. And it's basically what I would term a passive use. You know, you can walk around in it, you can't grade in it, you can't do ground disturbances in it. Any tree removals have to be done with the certified arborist, et cetera, et cetera. But from that envelope that was established in 2007, we actually have reduced this. So all the boundaries remain the same, except on that east side where we pulled it back to the 50-foot creek buffer area. So the envelope from 2007 is being reduced about 5,000 square feet. All the other, on the east side, all the other boundary lines of that envelope remain consistent.
Okay, so the dashed line in the lighter green now that showed the envelope, that's the former location of the envelope, or technically that's still part of the building envelope?
Yeah, so that sort of hemp green that's around the building site, that's the development envelope. And you can see that it moves off to the left-hand side and encompasses the existing house on 104. And then the lighter green right to the right of it is a designation, this is all in the land use code legend, for the creek restoration. That is not development envelope. It will not be development envelope after this approval and map recordation. It is now.
Okay, I was confused because the dashed line extended out to a couple of feet from the sewer easement. On
Yes,
the detail map.
we're actually going to restore over the sewer easement too, as part of that 50-foot buffer area.
Okay.
I suppose if the line ever had to be dug up, it would be dug up. And in that regard, if I may, Madam Chair, it is our expectation that there would be a normal faithful performance of material bond for our landscaping in the tree replacement and for the restoration of the 50-foot buffer area.
Okay, did you say bond?
A bond.
Okay.
So basically,
Okay.
a bond of security.
I know what a bond is,
Yes.
yep.
So, that's our expectation.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
So just to summarize, nothing is being modified here relative to envelope or setbacks. That would be in contradiction to what was approved with the original subdivision map.
That is correct, except the building envelope is even being further reduced with the restoration area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Campanella. Did you have questions, Commissioner Schwartz? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The first one, in no particular order, I wanted to, perhaps this is to staff, I'm looking to a line from the Planning Commission's March 15th, 2007 meeting minutes, a comment about conditioning the garages, and it's remarkable that Mr. Mahan is here because I'm reading in the meeting minutes that Mr. Mahan asked for a conditioning of the garages. So that leads me to turn to our current conditions of approval, just to understand, if I could, on page 2 of 9 of our conditions of approval, if the language in number 4, garages available for parking, if this is a carry forward, and if there's anything either staff or Mr. Lloyd would like to remark, I'll just read it. A requirement that all garages be kept open and available for the parking of vehicles owned by the residents of the property in the manner for which the garages were designed and permitted.
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Schwartz, that's our standard condition of approval regarding garages.
Okay, so nothing that was specific to
No.
the prior decisions by Planning Commission
No.
or City Council in that regard? Okay.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, I would point out to you that there's this long kind of umbilical cord thing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. It's
Yeah,
called
that's
unconditional storage.
You're right, it's storage. So we've got substantial storage here where we intend that vehicles would be parked in this garage and fully accept the 2007 condition and the condition today.
So what does that unconditional storage look like since you're on that? Because that was my question.
It's just a corridor that goes back that
What do you mean by corridor? It's not a built structure?
is underneath the first floor. It is a built structure. It would have a concrete walls and roof on
Basement,
it.
okay.
Yeah, it's a storage,
Okay.
extra storage.
Okay.
Interesting, okay. And then, again, in no particular order, just as I'm going through our documentation, to Ms. Ostranger, if I could, in the letters of concern, shall we call them, from some of the neighbors,
Could we take public comment before we go to the letters of concern? Is
that's
that
fine, I'll hold that then, and I'll keep going.
if you don't
through
mind,
my
Commissioner
questions
Schwartz?
and then-
Yeah,
Yep,
because
sure.
I think I'm trying to keep it specific to if you have questions of the applicant, or his presentation.
staff?
Yeah, before we go, and then we need to go to public comment.
Okay,
Thank you.
very, very good. Let me just do this then. If I could ask you to come back up, Mr. Lloyd, for a moment. You mentioned I want to go back. A willingness to dedicate some access. I don't know if I'm getting my directionals correct. I don't know which slide it might be to show kind of east wrapping around up north, dedicating it for city access. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, that you and your client are willing
Yeah,
to
Madam
dedicate?
Chair,
And
Commissioners.
maybe you could use the mouse to outline the area.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwartz, it has been shared with me in the last week that Public Works, so you see the sewer line easement, and I'm just coming right up through here.
Yes.
And I believe just off of our property here, there's a manhole, and then I believe it takes a 90-degree turn to the left, and there's another manhole somewhere further down. And then, of course, there's a manhole in our private street. Sorry. There's on this side of the creek, and I showed you that photo, there's a road coming up right through here.
This is the east or the right side you're
to the right side
drawing?
of the creek. Yeah, to the right side of the creek where I was bringing the cursor, somewhere right in here.
Excuse me, Mr. Lloyd, I have a pretty good slide for that. I added an aerial photograph here. I can point to it. So here's the proposed development envelope for the lot. Y'all oriented right. Here's Jorgensen Lane. Here's the turnaround. Here's the proposed development envelope. The seasonal creek comes right down through here. These green dashed lines are the sewer easement. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's little pink dots that indicate the manholes. So in this aerial, if you look closely, you can see through these trees, you can see that dirt road. Jorgensen comes up here and makes this curve, and that dirt road shoots right off of there and comes around here and just kind of stops. So City Public Works, wastewater staff apparently have been using this to access these manholes.
That's the dedication you're referencing, Mr. Lloyd?
So if city staff feels that they need that access, we certainly understand why they might. We're willing to voluntarily dedicate access to City Public Works to access these areas. And in working that out, where Tony has the other manhole here on the left side, it might even be more advantageous to come in the driveway of the existing house and just to be able to drive up there. I imagine they have to get a jetting truck up there close to it, and then they pull the hose out. So we would work out with Public Works what they need, and I mean, these would be very periodic visits, once a year or something like that, so it's not an imposition.
And so then the HOA would maintain clearance and access along that pathway, so to speak.
Yeah, I would think, although this is in this passive use area I described,
Yes.
It's an existing improvement, if you will, that could be maintained in there. And I would think that the property owner of that property would probably like to have a little dog walking pathway and whatnot. So I think it's it's an integral improvement that has multiple uses.
Okay.
Chair Wiscombe, I have a couple of photographs that I took at the site that shows you. So this photograph's taken like right here looking this way, so it's right in this area. So this is the fence running along the north side of the subject lot, and this is that old graded road curving around. As it comes around this way, it would connect down to Jorgensen Lane. And this shows also the seasonal creek is right in this area. This is a shot almost standing in the same location, just turning a bit toward the northeast. And here's one of those manholes that we're talking about on the neighbor's property.
Okay. Mr. Baumann, I didn't quite understand to Commissioner Higgins' questioning of you regarding the safety element not being referenced in the staff report as part of our general plan consistency findings requirement, and starts on page 5 in the staff report and goes through a number of elements, but not the safety element, with all the discussion around this being in a high-fired, specifically the foothill high-fire hazard area. Could you clarify for me again, as a follow-on to your answer to Commissioner Higgins, why the safety element is not included in our staff report and for our GP consistency consideration?
We neglected to include a discussion of the safety element in the staff report, although ultimately the safety element for these issues get implemented by the high fire building code and also by the high fire landscaping standards for brush clearance around structures.
So to interpret that, are you saying that it should have been included? It was an oversight not including it? I want to clearly understand.
I think what he's saying is that the policies in place are more stringent than our safety element, which is more general. Is that what you're trying to say, Mr.
Yes.
Baumann? Yeah.
Okay, so when you say you neglected to it, I wanted to understand what you mean by that, but okay. Then let me just see if I have any other quick questions. I may need to come back.
Well, I know you have one for Ms. Austringer after we take public comment.
That's a separate one. I think I'll stop there, and I'm sure I'll have some additional questions after public comment, and I hear from my colleagues as well. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Schwartz, thank you. Now, we will go to public comment, and I am going to put 2 minutes on the clock. When you come up to speak, I'll announce the first speaker and then the one following. You each have 2 minutes. There's a little timer there, and as you end your time, I'll interrupt you if I have to, but and I'm just trying to think if I need to say anything else. I think that's it. So we'll go ahead and open public comment, and I know what I wanted to say. Put the mic, please, up to your mouth so we can hear you, because sometimes it doesn't broadcast well on the video recording if we don't do that. So our first speaker is John Warnock, and followed by Dr. David Unger.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I'm John Warnock, and I've lived in that neighborhood for 34 years. I'm at 599 Mountain Drive, and our property looks out over this former 9-acre parcel. And I would just like to point out the very unusual situation we've got here. It's very interesting to me. I'm a retired lawyer, so I'm interested in these things. But this planning commission approved the subject project with 4 lots. So this is 2007 all over again. The intervening event was the unanimous disapproval by the city council. Now, we know that's not binding. However, the decision isn't binding, but the logic, the rationale, the concerns, none of those have been eliminated by time. In fact, the concerns obviously had to do with public safety and the concerns about fire. Those issues, those concerns are greater today than they were in 2007. We've been evacuated twice in 2009, and then most recently with the disaster in the Thomas Fire. Do you know that Thomas Fire extended right to our neighborhood? The Parma Park was in part aflame. And we were obviously, spread all around the country because we had to get out of there. But we were watching that fire in our neighborhood being blown by that, by those fierce winds. This is going to happen again. So it raises the question, what has been done, if anything, to mitigate those risks? The fire chief said essentially nothing. And he said, it is time, and I have repeatedly recommended a wildlands fire protection plan be initiated, funded, and conducted. He undoubtedly made that same recommendation were he in that position back in 2007. So that's been ignored. It hasn't been done. So today we have before yet another encroachment into the area to violate those fundamental principles. At some point, we all have responsibility as citizens to listen to our professionals and to start making some accommodations. It was very scary this last time, and we lost so many lives. And what was then until just December, the state's largest fire, it's now been eclipsed, and there will be another.
Okay, thank you. You're out of time. Thank you, Mr. Warnock.
I did send a letter
Yes, I'll get
And I
to,
bring it to your attention because it hasn't been addressed.
okay, and we have Dr. David Unger, followed by Randall Wade. Okay, welcome, Dr.
Good
Unger.
afternoon. Thank you for your service to the community here. John is my neighbor. We live in 2,000 square foot homes, as do most of the homes around this area, except for our new neighbor's home, which is over 5,000 feet. So we have homes coming into the neighborhood that are not up to community standards. So we all have, I can't speak for everybody, post-traumatic stress about the fires. You probably remember in the last 10 years, we had the T, the Gap, Jesusita, White, Sherpa, Ray, Whittier, Thomas Fire. We've been evacuated, and these people are moving into a high fire area. Would you want to move into a high fire? Is that an inducement to move into an area? Something you may not know about the road that comes out onto Mountain Drive. It comes out in the exact spot where the fire department marshals all their fire engines. So that is a area that doesn't need more traffic coming out. It's exactly the spot where they all line up to stage to fight these fires. I welcome you. It sounds like you came to the lot. Why don't you walk around our neighborhood and see the burned homes, the rebuilt homes, the homes that have been destroyed, the property that's damaged. We live in a fire area. I mean, why you would want to build in a fire area? The fire marshal said that this 2007 plan needs to be revisited, and he used the word moratorium. I'm imagining, I would think, people are going to think about a moratorium and building in high fire areas. There's not a lot of wisdom in that. This community needs affordable homes. This is going to be a multi-million-dollar home that's oversized for the neighborhood, and I don't see the value to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Randall Wade will be followed by Cody Campbell. Thank you. Welcome.
Yes, good afternoon. Let's see here. I live at the northwest corner of this property since 1970 in Mission Canyon. This property originally was a corridor for native peoples and wildlife in a oak woodland habitat. I could show you the aqueduct to the Mission over the hill in Rattlesnake Canyon that still exists today with the original tiles. I can also show you an old trail native to people and wildlife used to travel from Mission Canyon to Montecito. Wildlife still continues today. At my house, I hear 4 kinds of owls at night: the great horn, the barn, the screech, and the rare pygmy owl. 10 years ago, this was a 9-acre piece of inland property surrounded by 30 homes. This neighborhood fought tooth and nail to pare this project down to 3 lots of equal size with over 100 properties in opposition. What went through was not 3 lots of equal size, but what we have here today before us. This is only a continuation of mansionizations dotting our majestic mountains from Carpinteria to West Goleta. This project does nothing to address real Santa Barbara housing needs, but only raises housing prices and rents and puts more of our citizens idling on the freeways, polluting our planet.
Thank you, sir. Cody Campbell, followed by Dr. Jill Stein.
Hello, I'm Cody Campbell. Discussing this property, which is in a high fire hazard area. The fire risk has only increased, not diminished, since the City Council passed Resolution number 07086, in which they agreed with the community's concern about fire evacuation and safety. In that resolution, they stipulated that the Jorgensen Lane development be limited to 3 lots in order to maintain safety in case of fire. I don't understand why this issue is coming up again when it was clearly resolved by the City Council with their resolution number 07086. In the staff advisory's report to the Planning Commission for this meeting, I believe that it has primarily looked at the Jorgensen Lane loop. In its report, I don't feel that it has looked carefully enough at the surrounding community, at the common section of private road that is shared with other homes, or at the evacuation route for families and homes other than those on Jorgensen Lane. The residence plan shown to the Single-Family Design Board shows a 3-car garage plus additional off-street parking. This could potentially double the number of cars coming out of Jorgensen Lane in an emergency. We're not necessarily talking about the proposed building to be built on the proposed lot, but I would like to mention that when plans for 101 Jorgensen Lane were drawn up, the owners of that property, also over 2 acres, were told that they had to keep the square footage to a maximum of 4,000 square feet and that the building must be single level.
Okay, if you could wrap up, please.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
I'm done? Okay, sorry about that. I'm
No,
just wondering
don't
why that
apologize.
has not applied to the new lot.
Thank you very much. Okay, Dr. Jill Stein will be followed by Bill Mahan. Thank you.
Commissioners, thank you for hearing us today. I've taken some time away from work. I'm a tenured professor of sociology at SBCC, and I know there's a lot of other people in our neighborhood who couldn't be here today, and so I speak for others as well. I'm surprised to have to come here today and talk about this subdivision because it was already decided by the City Council. I'm imagining in this place 10 years ago that it should remain just 3 lots and not the 4 that's being proposed. I hope your minds are still open. It sounds like everybody's been talking about when the subdivision happens and when we build this house, and not if. I'm sure you're aware of the many reasons that we're here about the fire safety and the problems of being able to evacuate and adding more cars and more human activity when there's also going to be workers and service people could really impact us. And, you know, we had some time to evacuate in the last fire, but if it were to break out closer to this location, my biggest fear is being caught in a traffic jam coming out of Mountain Drive, where this wide driveway merges with Jorgensen and with the rest of Mountain and everybody else coming down to this point. It's a nightmare scenario. And this is not just philosophical. This is a real concern for a lot of people in our neighborhoods. I don't think anybody should pretend that granting this this lot split will, address any of the housing crunch in Santa Barbara. I know that you're seeing the rest of these people more often, the planners, the developers, the property owners, but your decision today is going to affect the people who maybe you're not seeing as often and maybe don't have a relationship with, but we live in that area, and your decision will impact us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Bill Mahan is next, followed by Leslie Gutierrez-Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Bill Mahan, and the little red dot up above is right there. That's the manhole on my property, and by the way, there are my solar panels. And the little red dot down here is the manhole on my neighbor's property, and then there is another a manhole up here further, and I think this 10-foot wide easement goes all the way up. It might go up as far as Las Canoas Lane.
Mr. Mahan, I'm going to stop you for just one sec. Can you use your mouse on this slide or not? Maybe. Yeah, let's.
The laser doesn't show.
The laser doesn't show up on the video.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You've seen the dots.
Okay.
So here's the thing that I'm concerned about: whether you go ahead with this lot line adjustment or not. Public Works needs to have an easement to those manholes and to that. For some reason, the sewer was put there, and the manholes were put there, and the city did not provide for an easement for service. And that needs to be something that you need to direct Public Works to look into. If one of those manholes or that sewer plugs up, this Public Works has no access to it. I'm very pleased that the applicant is willing to give the easement as a part of this project. I think that's very good. And by the way, where the old dirt road crosses the dry creek, the culvert there is badly damaged and it's collapsing. So there needs to be some remedial work done if there is an easement there that the Public Works could get in with some equipment. So that's my concern.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mahan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, our final speaker is Leslie Gutierrez Jones.
Thank you for adding me. I wasn't planning to speak today. I'll do my best. I'm not that great at it. I wrote a letter, which is included. My husband was going to speak a little bit today, but he was out because of health concerns. And those health concerns, we've dealt with ambulances. We're at the end. Actually, the way you described which house is which along there was not quite accurate. 563 is the last one at the end of the narrower section. It is true that there is a grandfathered-in garage carport that we wish weren't there as well. It's been there as long as we've been and before we moved to the house. When we moved into the house, and this was in my letter, 20 years ago, having made sure, looked with realtors around the Cheltenham area, looked at a place that later on did burn during the Tea Fire adjacent to Parma Park. We loved the area. We said, this is perfect. It's at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. There's no traffic. But, gee, the house we didn't buy on Parma Park, we didn't buy because at the time we had two small kids, and I didn't like the fact that it was this little narrow lane and could be hard to get out of in case of a fire. That house is gone. It's been replaced by an even nicer one that I look at regularly, but I'm glad we didn't buy it. And we almost did not buy this house. The realtor, Mort Maislish, told us that it couldn't, the 10-acre parcel, approximately 10-acre parcel, which is now the Jorgensen development, adjacent to us, because it was landlocked, would not be something that could get developed. There would only ever be that one now historic adobe on the property. We didn't figure it was the best thing. I'm sure he was being honest, but we figured we shouldn't just go by what the realtor says. Let's check in with the city. We checked in with the city, and we looked into how many houses can be on a private lane. We looked into the rules, which we thought we counted as an adjacent property because we sort of are, but we're not adjacent to the mouth of the driveway. That driveway has widened. Again, the question of the narrower spot, there's a creek issue there. There are properties that were grandfathered in. I take Mr. Lloyd's point about that's not the Jorgensen Ranch Development's problem, but it is a problem for people who 20 years ago tried to make very sure that we were safe, that we had very few houses on that and we'd be able to get out if we had to.
You're out of time. Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. And that was our last speaker, so I'm going to close public comment and let the record reflect, please. I believe the commission has received 10 letters from 9 persons, and I think 6 opposed and 4 support the project. I think that's right. So that's the latest count that we had. Okay. So with public comment closed, I'm going to go preset this to should have just made it. Okay. So, Mr. Lloyd, you have 1 minute and 18 seconds. Did you have something that you wanted to add?
Madam Chair, you're very gracious. I really don't have anything to add. I don't intend to dispute the neighbors for their concerns. They're meaningful concerns. I just think that it's a larger issue than this one fill-in property improvement. So I appreciate them all.
Okay. And Mr. Rick, did you have anything else to add? Okay, fine. Then it's too many buttons to push up here. I'm having malfunction. It's back to the commission now for any additional questions and deliberations. And I know we're going to go first to Commissioner Schwartz because she had a question for Ms. Ostringer. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So, Ms. Ostringer, as I was reading through the letters of concern by some of the neighbors, thinking about the Subdivision Map Act, if the Planning Commission decides to support the applicant's proposal to further subdivide, which is a change to the City Council's 2007 decision, I want to be very clear about the findings, other than what I've read in the staff report, that we would need to make to support the further subdivision with the concerns that have been outlined in the letters. Do you have any advice or guidance for us on that, or for me in particular?
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Schwartz, I think the staff did a good job of summarizing the findings that are necessary. They've outlined the compliance, in their opinion, with the general plan. The findings is under the Subdivision Map Act, so long as you can make the findings with regards to general plan, that it meets the code requirements, that it's appropriate for the street front modifications, and you can meet the finding that it meets the four findings, for the public street waiver that are codified in Title 22, then you've made the findings you need to make to accept.
I think what's of consternation for me is how the City Council's findings in 2007. Well, I'll just ask you this way. Do you see any substantive changes between 2007 and today relative to the findings the council made versus the findings we have to make today? Because if considerations, conditions, et cetera, haven't changed, and a member of the public asked this in at least in one letter, how can we deviate or contradict the council's 2007 decision and the related resolution? That's what I'm still thinking through in my own mind.
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Schwartz, my reading of the Subdivision Map Act is that you shouldn't go back necessarily to the findings of the council. You need to make your own separate findings, and you need to look at the subdivision as it's proposed, as it is today, and not take a historical look backwards. Look at the record that's in front of you, because that's the record that's going to be on appeal if it were ever to be appealed, and those are the findings that need to be made.
And then, so my last follow-on related question to you is, so if environmental conditions have changed, biological, environmental, climate change, pertaining to public safety, regarding fire, if those aspects have changed, would that be part of an appropriate new set of considerations for us today versus what the council was facing in 2011, since time doesn't stand still for us in all of these respects?
I would say yes, and I think that's what staff has looked at. I don't think they've looked at it from the past perspective,
Okay.
and Mr. Baumann can speak better, but I think they've looked at it from the present today as the parcel sits and its surrounding impacts.
Okay. And then my one other question to staff is back to this notion of the property owner being willing to dedicate access along the route that's now been identified from Mr. Lloyd's response. So my one question is, how do we incorporate that if my colleagues agree into conditions of approval? I would look for staff's guidance or maybe Ms. Ostringer's guidance. That's part A. But while we're looking at conditions of approval, I also want to pick up on something that Mr. Mahan mentioned, which is I haven't seen referenced here. If there is an old culvert that's collapsing, what do we need to consider about that? And repair for that. That's part of conditions. Did you want to, Ms. Ostringer?
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Schwartz, I'll speak to A first,
Okay.
which is for me the
dedication.
The dedication of the street. I think it's very gracious of the property owner to do that dedication. We can, since it's been voluntarily offered, we can put it into the conditions of approval as a voluntary offer and something that will get done. I would, it's my understanding that they're offering the unimproved access and in the location that it has traditionally been used, and we can incorporate that into the conditions.
Okay, and when the time is appropriate, you'll help us identify a place in the conditions of approval where it may be best placed?
I will.
Okay. And to the question, maybe Mr. Baumann, of the comment that Mr. Mahan made, who's the property owner just north or behind a part of this parcel, do you have any thoughts about this old culvert that Mr. Mahan says is collapsing, and what needs to be considered or pursued there to determine if in fact we have that? Mr. Lloyd, do you have some additional information that?
Only with the chair's permission.
I'm guessing she'll give you permission.
Go for it, please, Mr. Lloyd.
Yeah, I see that culvert as an ongoing repair and maintenance thing that we would take care of, and we would voluntarily incorporate that into our project description.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So would it be appropriate then, either Mr. Ballin or Ms. Ostringer, to incorporate that at the appropriate time into conditions also, and ongoing maintenance of the repair and maintenance of the culvert?
So long as it's something that the property owner is voluntarily willing to submit to.
Okay. Okay, I think those are my two outstanding questions at this time. Thank you.
Great.
Chair, excuse me, Chair Wiscombe, to follow
Yes.
up on that. The comments that I got from city wastewater staff was they would need a 10-foot wide easement. So if the culvert could be addressed to provide the 10-foot width, that would be good. And they also asked for 11-foot vertical height clearance for their sewer cleaning equipment. It's a tall vehicle that needs 11-foot clear and 10 feet wide.
Do they use a Vector truck, or is that some sort of a? Yeah. Okay. Is the applicant agreeable to those conditions? And yes, Mr. Lloyd, you may come up and answer those questions.
Thank you. Thank you again, Madam Chair. Yes, we are. It's a relatively minor improvement.
Okay. Okay. So both the vertical clearance and the width of the access. Okay.
Yes, the open space document allows us to do trimming that is approved by an arborist, so we would use that venue to do that in conjunction with Public Works.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So we're moving on to Commissioner Lodge. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One thing that has changed is that the City Council chose to allow ADUs and JADUs, junior ADUs, in the high fire zones. Is there anything such as the slope density ordinance that would prevent the addition of an ADU? I'm sure Mr. Rick has no intention of building an ADU at the same time, but a future property owner might decide to do that, which would, and as could the owners of the other properties there, add them.
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Lodge, the city ordinance for ADUs and JADUs wouldn't prevent this in this foothill high fire area. Neither would the density requirements, the slope density.
The slope density wouldn't either. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have comments. I don't have any questions. So
I am comfortable with staff's presentation of this project. The comments that have been made are clearly just disagreeing with staff. I don't pretend to be a subject matter expert on fire and safety, and I think we've seen that person in here today. I think that's been vetted as well as it can be vetted on conditions that are on the ground today, not conditions that are an assumed part of a conversation back in 2007 at that council. The task today isn't changing that council's decision. It's just, as Ms. Ostrander said, to look at it in today's place and time with the vetting process that has been taking place. A couple comments were made about, or at least one, on size and community standards. That's been addressed by the Single Family Design Board. Their comments were that the size, bulk, and scale was acceptable. They liked the architectural style. There was also a comment on this not being affordable housing. There is no requirement in the city for building affordable housing if you're meeting the requirements that are on the ground for the zoning ordinance. There are no incentives that are being given here. There is no burden on a private parcel owner to build a particular type of housing other than meet the requirements that are in place in the city. It meets the dwelling units per acre. It meets the slope restrictions. So I am supportive. There's not a set of findings that I can't make. If this goes forward, it would look like there's going to be some tweaking on the conditions. I'm appreciative of you standing up and saying you'll bond, but I think that's just a further expense on the insult of my suggestion. So I see it as something simpler, because if you bond, you would still have to have a monitoring process to make sure you're complying with the bond. And I just see something simpler. I'm trying not to judge ever the credibility or the veracity of somebody sitting over there, but I would be much more comfortable if we had some type of out year, pick a year, 5 year, 1 year at a time, up to 5 years of a monitoring look-see that made sure that somebody was continuing to take care of the oak trees and continuing to take care of the maintenance of the restoration project so that it would be in a better state of survivability. The requirements as they're written right now would just mean it's in place at time of sign-off, and the very aspects of the project that the applicant is touting, its seclusion, its privacy, would mean nobody would ever see it after that anyhow to lodge a complaint that it wasn't being taken care of. So a 5-year plan would at least make some level of maturity that would, in my mind at least, it would have some better level of survivability. So those are my comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Jordan. Commissioner Higgins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just in continuing on with comments about the project, and back to the safety element, I'd like to see some additional language worked into our findings today, if it's possible to do that on the fly, that ties the project back to maybe a little bit more thorough vetting of the safety element policies. There are a couple in particular that I think are worth noting. S33 on page 58 of our safety element says the city shall continue to implement programs that reduce the risk of wildland and structure fires, and then specifically states limit residential development in high fire hazard areas. And there's a strange sentence here. It says land use map designations limit residential density in high fire hazard areas. I take that to mean that there's a land use map that limits residential densities, and we're not in that area here. But it would be nice to see that a sentence or two in the findings that say exactly that this project is not in a land use map designation that has a density restriction on it. Similarly, there's some discussion in the next policy, S34, about evacuation routes that essentially requires an applicant or city staff to demonstrate that there's no evacuation interference, obstacles, et cetera, with the project coming through. And if I think what was maybe hinted at in the staff report, I can't tell, but there was a reference there to the action taken by the city council to allow ADUs in this zone, and that therefore we can conclude that there, with ADUs in this zone, there aren't any evacuation route obstacles or restrictions or constraints, et cetera. But I would like to see that maybe addressed more straightforwardly in the findings, or at least in the staff report. I'm not sure. I think that would be a more defendable document. I don't think this is going to end here, given the amount of history on the project and the neighbors' interest. And I want to just take a minute to explain. I'm sure you're aware of this, but we, as a planning commission, try to take projects through a process that vet them against existing policies, and you know that's what staff does, and we're the advisory body for staff to do that. And we don't have any policies, I don't think, that are limiting residential development in this zone. Again, to bring up the M word that was brought up, the moratorium, we don't have a moratorium, and I just want to make it clear that that's not our job to create a moratorium or limit property rights. That's the job of the city council. And if the city council wants to interpret or create policies differently than what's on the books, that's completely within their purview. But we haven't seen that happen yet. And the only tangential sort of comparative scenario that played out recently was this discussion about ADUs. And so if we're going to leverage what was said by the council with respect to ADUs, we definitely don't have anything that limits residential development opportunities if the project meets the rest of the development standards in our codes and general plans. So sorry, that probably sounds really boring and doesn't meet your needs, but that's what our job here is to do. But since it's likely it's going to carry on to another body, you have that opportunity there to take another swing at this project.
Chair Wiscombe, Commissioner Higgins, if I may, just for clarification, I wasn't sure by what you were saying. The findings that need to be on the record today. So if staff needs to clarify with regards to any of the things that you suggested need to come forward, those findings, we should make them here on the record, and staff can do that if they have the information there.
Those are the two policies that I think specifically could be added to our findings. If you want to try to do that on the fly, maybe with a break in between our action, I'm okay with that. That's at the chair's sort of discretion. I guess the other comment I wanted to make is that, two more comments. We had a pretty robust conversation at the Board of Supervisors yesterday about community wildland fire planning and what we're doing on a regional level. And there are a whole host of other things that speak to the greater good of the region that I think will have a greater impact. Reduce the opportunity for fire, wildland fire, than just this particular lot. So nothing that was discussed at the Board of Supervisors yesterday had anything to do with limiting residential densities. Also, there's all kinds of other greater mitigation plans, prescribed burns, et cetera, out there that should be gaining a stronghold, I think, that are in the county and hopefully will be soon in the city. And then this comment that Commissioner Schwartz made, or question about what was done in 2007, I think just technically it was not a denial. I don't understand what happened then to be a denial. So we don't have any. We're not in conflict with something that happened 12 years ago, 11 years ago, because that was not a denial of the project. That was, in my estimation, I wasn't there, a compromise to bring forward a project that was approved. So I don't see us in conflict here if we're supporting the project today.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. If I could just take a minute before we go to Commissioner Schwartz. First of all, I noticed when we were going up there, and I just would like a little clarification perhaps from Mr. Lloyd, when we were going up there in the van for our site visit, we did hit some I think they were oak trees, branches of oak trees. So and you showed a couple slides where I was a little bit concerned about the overhang of the foliage. So is this part of the homeowners, the HOA, that these trees get trimmed, or I'm wondering if we can condition the project to make sure that, for safety's sake, that these trees are trimmed and kept trimmed.
Madam Chair, the fire protection plan requires, among other things, that there be proper clearing for the road, and not only for car passage, but also back the 10 feet. It's part of the normal fire code for fires to start in tall grasses or anything. So those trees should be trimmed back.
Okay, and does staff have any recommendations on how we accomplish that? Because I think you showed a slide at the very entrance to Jorgensen off Mountain Drive, and it looked like some work needed to be done there. And then as we got further down the road before the turnaround point, the van actually kind of brushed some branches of trees. And so it's clear that needs to be accomplished, I think. And I don't know if you have any suggestions, if staff has any suggestions how we do that.
Chair Wiscombe, when Mr. Poirier was here, he was mentioning that the city does do clearance for city streets, and that they also require that private streets be maintained, and that we have the ability to enforce on that.
Right.
So I think we could treat your concerns today and proceed as if we had received enforcement, and we need to take action to get it addressed.
So would you actually put that in the conditions of approval? That
I think staff could handle that.
Okay. And then I also wanted to speak to the boulders. I'm a little bit. I'm concerned about the boulders. That was such a big issue in the January 9th Montecito debris flow, and I wanted to speak to possibly, I don't want those boulders just left there. I know that some of them are going to get reused, but we certainly could condition the project for removal of those that aren't used, right? So that we don't have any issue with some sort of a debris flow, if that were ever to come up, that involved boulders. So is that possible? Yeah.
Chair Wiscombe, that seems like a condition that can be added. It's not particularly a design review. I think it could just be a planning commission condition.
Okay.
I was trying to think if it was anything that needs to be addressed by the SFDB, but it doesn't seem to be.
It seems to me more of a safety issue than anything else. So I would think it would be here rather than at Single Family Design Board. But then on to that, the next one would be, where does one put, which is probably Single Family Design Board. We heard a lot of concerns here today, and if this commission goes forward to approve the subdivision, we heard a lot of concern. What was I going to say? About parking, and so there will be a lengthy construction period. So where do we put that there's no on-street parking for vehicles that are associated with the site? can that go in is it appropriate for that to go in our conditions of approval, or does that part of single-family design board and we just make a comment to them that we, because I think that's a huge concern. We do not want anything blocking Jorgensen Lane. No.
Chair Wiscombe, that is a standard requirement because that road needs to be maintained at its full width for fire access, so no parking is allowed on that street. If you wanted to add a condition, we could. We do have standard language for a condition that requires parking on site, but in this case, I don't know that it's necessary because it's just not allowed.
Well, I think it's particularly important here, given what we've heard from the neighbors that are, number one, opposed to the project. But I just think it's better to err on the side of caution, I guess, is where I stand personally. I can't speak for everyone on the commission, but those are just some of my concerns, and I certainly agree with Commissioner Jordan about his comments about the planting and monitoring plan for both the creek buffer restoration and the new tree planting, and I don't think, the new oak tree planting on the site.
Chair Wiscombe?
Yes.
Let's see. On page 7 of 9 of our conditions, we have a condition F2 for construction, storage/staging. I think that may address your concern already.
Are you in this? You're in the conditions of
the
approval?
Conditions.
Okay.
Page 7 of the conditions.
Chair Wiscombe, I think that condition could be modified, to be more clear that there shall be no storage or staging in the private right-of-way as well.
Great. Okay. That would help, I think. I just think anything to strengthen that.
And if we could ask a question regarding Commissioner Jordan's comment about the lands, on page 2 of 9 in our conditions, there's number 5, landscape maintenance, that says the landscaping shown on the approved landscaping plan shall be maintained and preserved at all times in accordance with the plan.
So that at all times is subject to all kinds of mischief.
Would you like for some sort of staff check-in or verification or report
some
back from the applicant at the 5-year
plan is what I'm saying. So my point is, you're asking me to judge the veracity of the applicant, and that condition will be met. And I can probably name 5 fingers worth of projects around town where landscape projects have come to our attention that trees were taken out, modifications were put in, nobody ever asked. And I am just saying that I think the nexus between planting a new plant and its future success would require a look-see at, if it's 5 years, that's 5 years. I'm happy with that. That's what I've seen in the past when we've done similar types of projects. I don't think it needs a full-blown financial burden of a monitoring program other than just an assessment report that what was intended actually happened, and 5 years later is fine, or an increment of times during that 5 years. It'd be something I'd expect you guys to be able to craft that would work well.
Maybe we could modify this condition for some sort of 5-year report.
I think maybe
or
annually
assessment.
for 5 years. How about that?
Sure.
Yeah, because I think you want to nip this in the bud if something is dying.
Oh,
yeah. So, dying or dead. Yeah. Okay. And also, along those lines, the applicant has mentioned and staff has mentioned 24-inch box. I think for the oak trees, I think that should actually be included in the conditions. If that's what they're proposing, then because the trees that are out there are not only in nice shape, but they're pretty large. So I think 24-inch box is reasonable, but it should be a requirement. But okay, Commissioner Schwartz, I'm going on to you now. You were next.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to start with the letters from the neighbors that we've received, especially the ones that express concern, and some of you are still here in the chambers today. And I want you to know that personally I've read all of your letters. This is important to me that we receive and read and consider very seriously all of the public comment. There's a reference in one of the letters from Mr. Unger about considering the value of precedents. So, Madam Chair, just please indulge me. I want to speak to the public for a moment here as part of the considerations today. Precedence is important to me, which is why receiving and reading a full record for all of our hearings and for us to be informed and make sound decisions is important. So that's why we have received, and I have read the full record, including the 2007 Planning Commission meeting minutes and the 2007 City Council meeting minutes, such as they are. They're fairly minimal, but nonetheless. Now, having said that, while I consider precedence and respect or apply respect to former Planning Commission colleagues, to former city councils, at the same time, maybe you heard this as I was asking Ms. Ostringer some of my questions, I'm bringing forward not only the considerations of those decision-making bodies, but also the times in which we find ourselves, because our community is not static. We continue to live through evolving times on every level, as we know. So having said that, and in looking at the map, this is Mr. Bauman's PowerPoint slide 16, which I think paints a very clear picture of not only the history of the subdivisions of this neighborhood, but the jigsaw puzzle of divided parcels and where they face, if there's easy access or not, small versus large, et cetera, mean that we have a very diverse and kind of hodgepodge look at land use of private ownership in this neighborhood. So where are we today? We have a fair amount of density in a high fire area that has experienced evacuations, loss of property. I can't attest to loss of life, I hope not. So I do believe that new considerations for public safety are important for us to fold in increasingly in our decisions, our land use decisions in these neighborhoods in Santa Barbara. Now, having said that, it would be irresponsible of me on the fly, to use that term, to try to apply some new policy that I'm just creating on my own from my own opinions and my own science that I've researched on a project-by-project basis. So without a new wildland fire plan from the city, I feel at somewhat of a disadvantage in applying what could be new policies and guidelines in all of our high fire areas that would give us better guidance on, not just guidance, but also a balance between the legal rights of property owners, and I want to mention that. That's very important to understand. We're not here, nor would anybody intentionally or unintentionally try to inhibit the legal rights of property owners to develop as laws and policies and guidelines allow. But at the same time, I am interested in an update, and I would hope that the City Council, perhaps, especially in light of the Thomas Fire and the debris flow, would focus city staff to include a prioritization of updating our wildland fire plan, which is unfortunately out of date, and I think that does need to be a priority. So I'm faced with the current policies we have before us today, our general plan, and making findings of consistency. And I feel for the neighbors who are very concerned about their safety and public and access and receiving access from our first responders. But may I also say, and I hope this comes across with all due respect, for those who are living in these neighborhoods, I myself do not live in a high fire neighborhood, somewhat intentionally. You know, some of it is eyes wide open. You've chosen to live in neighborhoods that have more risk, various types of risk. That's your prerogative. There's tremendous beauty, natural beauty in this neighborhood, which I'm sure is a significant draw for those of you who have lived there and continue to live there, and I understand that. At the same time, what comes with that are some disadvantages or some risks that are just part of these areas of our community. So I feel, and I've said this before when we've talked about development on the Riviera, where it's very dense and the streets are often narrow and wind around and make ingress egress difficult. This is also a personal decision for people who live in these neighborhoods. So I just want to leave you with that. And again, I appreciate and respect that you want to live in this neighborhood, but I think some responsibility and some risk comes with that hopefully is just acknowledged. And so having said that, now let me turn to...
Respond to that?
No, I'm afraid we've closed public comment, so I'm sorry, you cannot.
Let me go to the staff report, if I may. And I want to touch on some additional comments and suggestions Commissioner Higgins made, page 5 of our staff report. Again, general plan consistency and the safety element. I would like to see some additional language included that support findings, if that's appropriate, based on the majority of commissioners' votes today. You referenced, I think, Mr. Higgins, 33, 34. This is starting on page, I think, 58. The safety element. Staff can pull this up, but I would support you in including some language from our safety element. And personally, in all of the high fire areas of our community, our city, where we have projects coming forward, I can't direct staff to do this, but I would really like to see safety element language included as a general plan consistency. I think that's very important. Now to the conditions of approval. I am in support, just to recap, Madam Chair, where my support lies. I'm in support as voluntarily offered by the applicant, dedicated access on, I think, do we call it unimproved or whatever the proper language is, Ms. Ostranger, unpaved, unimproved path that's already in existence. I think it's east, wrapping up around to the north of the property, including, or I should say, and in addition to repair, ongoing maintenance of the old culvert. I think Mr. Lloyd agreed to that would, Mr. Riggs, yes, voluntary agreement to that as well, to the 10-foot wide, 11-foot vertical height clearance along this path. I'm sorry, I'm going back to the dedicated access. I want to touch on what Chair Wiscombe mentioned regarding the boulders, and I don't know how to craft this language, Madam Chair, but I think this is very important in light of the severe devastation we experienced in Montecito, the fire, and then following with the debris flow. I personally lost friends in that debris flow. It's very close to me. Yeah, I know many of us did. And to just drive through Montecito today, you can see the stacked up boulders that are just waiting to come down on many elevations. So I'll leave it to staff and perhaps also Ms. Ostranger to give us some recommendations about some language that could be used here, but I certainly would not be supportive of unused natural, I don't know what we call it, the boulders, the natural boulders, to simply remain on the property unsecured. So whatever's required there. On page 2 of the conditions of approval, I'm in support of what I heard from a couple of my colleagues regarding number 5, the landscape maintenance. I think I heard from Commissioner Jordan with support from the chair, monitoring and maintenance each year for the first 5 years, so I'm in support of that. And then I think there's one other item on page 7 of our staff report we've had some discussion of, and Ms. DeBusk offered some revised language to F2, which is construction, storage / staging, which would also include no storage staging in the private right-of-way, if I understood you, Ms. DeBusk. And so I'm in support of that. As I'm finding myself in a number of our decisions, I wish we had some additional tools. I wish we had more up-to-date tools. Here, I've already talked about the tools regarding the urban wildland fire plan. I spoke with former or retired Fire Chief Pat McElroy about this over the last couple of years, and for me, it's a call of urgency to staff and the City Council to make this a priority. I feel uncomfortable trying to apply what I think we should have in place on a project-by-project basis. That's not right to me. It's not fair, it's not responsible, so I don't do it, and I won't do it. At the same time, we can't keep, I don't like that phrase, kicking the can down the road. However, we have to face the facts of what we must spend our resources on and prioritize, and I think that in this accelerated time of climate change and with ongoing historic drought, we have a lot at stake in Santa Barbara, both loss of property and life, and so I would like to see this reprioritized, and I'll be discussing this with some City Council members. So in final, I will be supporting, with all of that said, I want to make sure all of what my thoughts are on the record. I'll be supporting from page 1 of our staff report, tentative subdivision map, 2 modifications, 2 public street waivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. And I want to make sure, Mr. Baumann, the tree trimming along Jorgensen for fire safety is something that we don't need to deal with that here. I think you said you would just take it on as enforcement. Is that correct? Or does it belong in the C of A?
Chair Wiscombe, we can handle it as enforcement, although another good check-in would be as prior to issuance of a certificate of occupancy for any new home, is just that all of those things get confirmed, which I believe is something the fire department does anyway, but we could certainly add a condition just to make sure everyone's aware of it and double checks that.
Is that something that you would support also, Commissioner Schwartz, adding that as a condition? Since it's the one you didn't mention.
Oh, sure. Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. I think you covered all the rest of them. Before we go on to there's some other lights on, but before we go there, I just have a question about the safety element. We're not making findings for the safety element. From what I understood from Mr. Baumann, what's required of the applicant safety-wise is much more stringent than what's in our safety element. So therefore, that wasn't mentioned. But how do we handle, we have 2 commissioners here who want some language about the safety element in this. So how do we handle that, Ms. DeBusk?
Chair Wiscombe, the approval of the subdivision map does require findings of consistency with the general plan. And so because the safety element is part of the general plan, it would be appropriate if you wanted to add findings that specifically mention that you find the project to be consistent with certain policies of the safety element.
Okay, so Commissioner Higgins mentioned S33 and S34. Could someone read those to us?
Madam Chair,
yes.
may I? The statement in the staff report finding, or the findings that the project's consistent with the general plan automatically includes the safety element, obviously, but I think it just gives additional constructive notice to the folks in the audience or anybody opposed to the project that, staff did their homework on all of it, because that's what the issue is. That's, I think, of the greatest concern to the neighbors in the area. So to specifically say, you could add a sentence midway down Section A of the tentative map findings that the project's consistent with the safety element, and specifically with regard to the policies in the safety element concerning fire hazard programs and evacuation routes. Those are the 2 buzzwords that are discussed in those policies that I enumerated earlier. I don't think we need to get into the detail of those, but just a sentence on those. And that gives the neighbors something to focus on, too, as this perhaps could continue on.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. I think that's an excellent idea. Okay. So we're going back to We have more lights on. Commissioner Campanella, I think you were next.
I'm in agreement with what my fellow commissioners have said so far and the conditions that we're considering. I want to maybe just concentrate on the public street waiver, because that was brought up on one of the letters. And we are making findings for that. I'm looking at page 7. We've proven, number one, just on page 7 in the staff report, satisfied with number 1, adequate access. The maintenance is satisfied by the recorded agreement. And then on number 3, I presume this, Jorgensen, the maintenance of the roadway would take place all the way down to Mountain Drive. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, please, Mr. Lloyd, go ahead.
Yes, our fee doesn't include all the way down there, but we have easement rights, and it's part of the maintenance agreement and part of the road plans that were approved and constructed.
Okay, but the maintenance down to Mountain Drive is a responsibility of
the association.
Okay.
So it's part of the CC&R's maintenance program.
Okay, so for the benefit of the neighbors who have at the Y, you are maintaining an area that they are benefiting from in order to get access to Mountain Drive. Is that correct?
We're all benefiting. The only parties that are burdened with the responsibility is us.
Okay.
It's
so
the 4 lots.
Right. So if we're looking at a best interest, improve quality, and reduce impacts, that's been built in a way because you now have 4 people contributing or 4 homeowners contributing to maintaining the road, which also benefits the neighbors.
Correct.
In the event of fire or being adequate width to get fire trucks in there. Thank you. Along with that, we spoke about maybe a benefit to fire suppression because now you have defensible space around the particular unit that's being proposed. Likewise, ingress and egress on this road for the neighbors, for the other people in the subdivision to get out is enhanced because now you have a fire break that perhaps you would not have if there was a fire coming down the hill and was blocking the exit route to get out of this subdivision, the 4 lots, because you now have an area of 8,000 square feet that the fire would be suppressed because of what's going in, both the unit as well as the surrounding landscaping. So if we're talking about some benefits from this building going in place and completing the subdivision, I feel that's there and also supports the public street waivers in my mind that we're making a finding for. So I just wanted to add on to what everyone has said already. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Campanella. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm going to be disagreeing with my colleagues again. And as someone who has lived in a high fire zone since 1971, had to evacuate in 77, then it was 21 years later, until 2008, I evacuated again. Then less than a year later, for the Jesucita fire, 2008 was T, 2008 was Jesucita. That was less than a year later. And then again in 2017 for the Thomas fire. Things have changed. It's not that it wasn't that way when we first moved there. There's been extended drought and the changes in the climate, extended heat that we didn't used to have. And I know of homeowners who did absolutely everything that the fire department could think of to make their homes defensible, and their houses burned anyway. And doing all these things that, yes, it's great that the Board of Supervisors is going to be doing these other things that don't apply in the city, actually, or on the front. It doesn't work to do control fires on the front of the mountains. It can be used in more inland areas, but not here. And even if you do that, in the paint fire, the fire jumped a 6-lane freeway and kept going. And if the wind hadn't shifted, it would have gone all the way to the ocean through Hope Ranch. So I can't, because of the increased density, the fact that the council has allowed ADUs and junior ADUs in the high fire zones, when the Planning Commission approves this subdivision map, you are approving 2 extra units. I know that's not in their proposal, but there is the potential for another unit, as there is for the other 3 parcels. There they can add a unit, and I think it's just adding too much intensity and development to this area, and so I will be voting no. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. Well, I was on the Planning Commission in 2007 when we approved the 4-lot subdivision. And I was very much involved with the discussion at the City Council when they cut it back to a 3-lot subdivision. Like Commissioner Lodge, I was involved in quite a few evacuations over the past several years. And the evacuations that I was most imminently involved with was the Tea Fire, during which I lost my house. And the evacuees all were pretty polite at the intersections. We alternated cars so that there was no jam-ups like we're hearing from the speakers today. I rebuilt back in the same area, so I'm eminently concerned and understand the situation with buildings in the high fire zone. Someone asked what has been done to change since 2007. Well, I would propose that there's now a 20-foot wide access road that will enable fire department access and also to enhance exit. I would propose that there are now fire hydrants where there was wildland vegetation and unkept trees. And with the building envelopes being cleared, as the fire marshal said, the safety of the whole neighborhood is actually enhanced by this rather than being degraded by it. In addition, the remediation of the riparian corridor, I think, is a positive both from the standpoint of fire and from the standpoint of wildlife. The subdivision meets all of the requirements of state and city law, so I see no reason to deny the applicant's request to do the subdivision, and so therefore I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Okay. I will also be supporting, I think we've done a really good job up here of making this project better with some additional conditions. So I just want to review them before we go to a motion. And okay, so we're going to strengthen the language on construction-related parking and storage, not on Jorgensen Lane, right? Okay. And we're going to, and this is in no particular order because my notes are kind of messy, but we're going to condition the project with 24-inch box Coast Live Oaks. And we are going to dedicate an access way that's 10 feet wide and 11 feet of vertical clearance to the city for maintenance of the manholes, and in addition to that, repair and maintain that access and repair the culvert. And we're going to require a vegetation monitoring period of 5 years annually for not only the oaks, but the creek restoration vegetation. And we're going to add language regarding the boulders in terms of what doesn't get used. Either has to have an anchoring system that the city deems is safe, or they get removed. And I think that covers everything that we talked. And we're going to add Commissioner Higgins' language in the safety element. Commissioner Jordan has his hand on the button. Go for it.
Just waiting for you. You don't have the slide up there. If you want to put that slide back up with the findings, or do you care if I just refer to it? So I'll make the motion to approve the project, making the findings that are in the staff report subject to the conditions of approval, with the gracious listing that the chair just provided. There may be some other tweaks here if something was left off. And before this wraps up, I just wanted to make one more comment too. Sometimes you get staff reports that are really good. Sometimes you get them that are okay. Sometimes you get them that are not very good. I particularly was happy with this staff report. In particular, the sections on the bottom of page 6 and the top of page 7. So the last paragraph on the subdivision ordinance, and then all the way through to the end of fire hazard. If that's Tony, if that's you, you did a really good job of anticipating what my concerns and questions would be and answering them in the staff report, and that doesn't always happen. I think maybe even frequently the perspective is not from me looking at it, it's more from staff looking at it, and I just think this was a really good staff report to walk us through what you anticipated were going to be the issues and concerns. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for that. So there you go.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Jordan and a second by Commissioner Thompson. Do we have any further discussion on the motion? Did you have a question, Ms.
Chair
Busk?
Wiscombe, I just wanted to clarify, because there was talk previously of conditioning the replacement ratio for the Oaks as 3-to-1.
Oh,
Is that something you wanted to add?
Yes, I believe that's in the staff report. I think we have all made the assumption that it's 3-to-1. That's a good catch. So we could just cement that in the C of A. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other comments, questions? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, and
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I'm out of order here. The motion did not include amending the findings at all? Is that what?
yes, it did. Oh, yes. It actually.
It did not.
Well, yeah, technically it didn't. Wait, no, it did, because I referenced your sentence to the safety element. Yes, and Commissioner Jordan, when he made the motion, referenced my recap.
If there's any doubt, I'll. For the record, my light was on, but you skipped me. Sorry. But if there's any doubt, I'll restate that motion that if that particular part was left out, to include those two components of the safety element, that those are also part of the motion.
Yeah, I kind of gave the recap, Commissioner Higgins, and in my recap, I mentioned the very well put together commentary you gave on the safety element. So that should absolutely have been included in the motion, and I think everyone up here assumed that it was. So, okay. And sorry, I missed your light being on. Okay. So that carries 6-1, and I will announce the 10-day appeal period to City Council on this, and thank you all for coming, and we respect your opinions and appreciate your being here. So that concludes that item. And now we're moving on to item number 4, which is our administrative agenda, and 4A, staff hearing officer liaison report.
Last week was map time extension and a project that had interior lot area modifications and setback modifications, so nothing too exciting.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so other committee and liaison reports. Start with Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very light report, and I just want to say enthusiastically that after a number of years, and some of the commissioners were still on the commission, such as myself, when we heard the very first iteration of the Natural History Museum's master redevelopment plan that is now coming to fruition. I attended the September 21st ribbon cutting and experience of the beautiful restoration and new configuration of human access to the Oak Woodland area that's both been very sensitively done by Susan Van Atta and her firm, and it's now open to the public, and I think many generations for many years to come are really going to enjoy the museum in a new way and the natural environment in a new way that also includes a sensitive development in that habitat. So I encourage everyone to go up to the museum, including the new butterfly exhibit that's going to be available year-round now. So great fun for friends, family, out-of-town guests, and encourage everybody to avail themselves of that. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other lights on. Commissioner Thompson, go ahead.
A couple of weeks ago, I represented the Planning Commission at City Council appeal hearing for 1909 Camino de la Luz. Based upon new information about the potential for a path that had been modified following the earthquake on the bluff face, the City Council voted to kick it back to us for reconsideration. There was a lot of discussion about bifurcating the tree removal, which we'd already approved, and the bluff face path, which we didn't consider. But in the end, the staff wanted to keep them together, and so we're going to get the whole project back again. It's interesting that the appellant didn't even show up at the hearing. So at some point, we'll be getting it back up to staff scheduling.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Okay, on the 20th of September, I attended the Downtown Parking Committee meeting, and actually Commissioner Jordan was there to speak. The committee reviewed the draft Funk Zone Parking Study Report, which was quite interesting. And it concluded, I'm just going to read a couple things here. It concludes that although the parking supply in the Funk Zone is sufficient to accommodate those seeking parking, utilization of the parking resources is unbalanced. So the street spaces are often full while there's ample parking in the public lots. Ample parking available in the public lots. Interesting, quite a few neighbors from West Beach came, and they talked about how parking in their neighborhood has become very difficult. Hotel guests who are staying in facilities that charge for parking, these guests are deciding, no, I'm just going to go into the neighborhood and park my car, and so there was a lot of talk about wanting to be included in further studies that involve the Funk Zone. And the full report is available online at the Downtown Parking Committee's website, so you can go to the city and then go to boards and commissions and get to the Downtown Parking Committee and see the report. It was really a comprehensive report, and I think very well done. They did it in a lot of different ways. So, and then Commissioner Schwartz and I attended the Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan Subcommittee meeting on the 25th. And the subcommittee received a presentation on the economic and fiscal analysis and potential impacts of sea level rise in asset categories of transportation, emergency facilities, stormwater infrastructure, recreational areas and facilities, the harbor, and the public and private parcels. And the analysis summarized the potential vulnerable assets. And I just wanted to announce to anyone that's watching the meeting that that all of this information that we've had on our subcommittee meetings to date is available online at the subcommittee's website, which is https://www.santabarbacA.gov/BRDCOMN, which is Boards and Commissions, /NZ for New Zealand, /SLR for Sea Level Rise, /default So you can absolutely go there. There's lots of information there that we have seen, and my commissioners are laughing at me for actually reading out the website. But I think people, this is going to be a really interesting topic, and I think people will like to start getting up to date on that. So thank you. And Commissioner Higgins, you have your light on, and I noticed it.
Thank you. One more announcement, if you don't mind. The American Planning Association has kicked off the Citizens Planning Academy last night. Commissioner Lodge was a guest speaker. And we're going to keep registration open, even though it's already started at a discounted rate for the next 6 weeks. And my teaser is next week we have a discussion about our energy platform here in the county, particularly oil development or exploration. That'll be the speakers for that item are Aaron Briggs of the county and Doss Williams, who that is. And we have another subject on the for our curriculum next week too, about our water supply constraints, strategies, etc., taught by Kathy Taylor, Amy Steinfeld, and a candidate for the Montecito Water District Board of Directors, Brian Goebel. Should be good. So please sign up. We only have 10 more spaces available.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Okay, so I just got a correction from Ms. Vaughn. Well, actually, she gave me a short link to the website for the sea level rise, and it's considerably truncated. So it's santabarbaraca.gov/SLR. Is that it? That's it. So I'm sorry. I just, so. Yeah, I was trying to be helpful, so use that one. And thank you, Ms. Vaughn, for that. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.